Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 9:05 a.m. Welcome to the Committee Chairs Meeting Overview. Good morning. My name is S. Javed Anwar. I am the Chair, Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. It is 9:05 a.m. I would like to call April 24, 2024 Committee on Innovation, Data, Educational Analytics meeting in order. This meeting is being held via live broadcast. Members, I call your name. Please announce your presence. Javed Anwar present. Welcome, Wilson.
Present.
Richard Clemmer.
Present.
Fred Farias.
Present.
Stacy Hawk.
Present.
Ashley Thomas.
Present.
Daniel Wong.
Present.
Please record the minutes that we have a quorum. Agenda item number 2 is consideration of possible action to approve the minutes from January 24, 2024 committee meeting. Members, do I have a motion for approval and a second?
So moved.
Second. All right. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there any noes? Motion passes. Item number 3 is public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. We do not have anyone registered to testify, so we go on to the next item. Item number 4 is consideration of possible action to approve the consent calendar. The consent calendar items include the items that can be approved without comments or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that needed more our attention. The consent items are highlighted in gray on the agenda. We are going to vote on the consent items in 2 votes: non-rule items and rule items. Member, following the non-rule consent calendar for consideration. 5C, consideration of possible action to appoint a student representative, the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. 5E is consideration and possible action to appoint to the Standing Advisory Committee for Public Junior College. A member, does anybody wants to remove any items from the consent calendar? Does anybody want to add any item to the consent calendar? A member, is there a motion to approve? And I need a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Members, next item we will vote on is rule consent items. These rules either technical, conforming the implement of non-controversial policies around which is consents. There is following items on the consent consideration. 5F3, consideration of possible action to adopt amendment to the board rule, chapter 21, subchapter A, section 21.4 concerning general provision. Member, do anybody want to remove this item from the consent calendar? Does anybody want to add rules to the consent calendar? Member, is there a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda item 5A is consideration of possible action to approve the data required by Texas Education Code, section 51.4033 and section 51.4034 related to non-transfer credit and transfer courses. Dr. Melissa Humphreys, Assistant Commissioner for Data Management Research, and Dr. Christina Zavala, Director of Student Success Research, will provide presentation and be available to answer any question. Please move.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. I'm Melissa Humphreys, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner of the Data Management and Research Team. Today, Dr. Zavala and I will be presenting an overview of the report on non-transferable credit and courses taken at public two-year colleges. Next slide, please. Before we get into the details of this report, I want to briefly give some context about the transfer landscape in Texas, specifically for students who transfer from a two-year to a four-year. This overview is pulled from data included in the Coordinating Board's annual transfer report that's produced by the Academic and Health Affairs Division. And this data is from the latest report that you all approved in October. A consistent finding from this report that's also supported by national research is that the time it takes a transfer student to earn a bachelor's degree at a university is longer than a student who starts at a university and stays. Additionally, we find that the graduation rate for transfer students is lower than students who start at a university. Specifically from our report, we find when we look at juniors in 2018, students who were transfers had a graduation rate of 68%, while those who started at the university had a grad rate of 86%, which is a pretty large gap. Our division is currently working on updating these numbers for the next transfer report, which you'll see in October. The transfer report also outlines several barriers to transfer that the institutions themselves report to us. These include excessive semester credit hours, lack of advising, lack of financial aid, insufficient transfer staffing, and associate's degrees with courses that aren't applicable to a bachelor degree. Understanding this context really helps orient us to what this specific report we're going to tell you about today. Next slide, please. So the statutory requirement for the report today was part of Senate Bill 25 out of the 86th legislative session. The report includes first an analysis of courses in the lower division academic course guide manual, or ACGM, which students were not granted credit for when they transferred to a public university. It also includes an analysis of community college courses taken by transfers to four-year institutions and associate's degree earners. Both reports are meant to provide insights that will lead to the overall goal of facilitating transfer, academic progress, and timely graduation for these students. Dr. Zavala now is going to walk you through the findings of this report.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Christina Zavala, and I'm the Director of Student Success Research in the Data Management and Research Division. Before we discuss the report, I do want to give a thank you to Lori Fisher on my team for pulling together the analysis for the report, as well as her recent work helping institutions gain valuable insights from the underlying data related to the non-transferable credit report. So, for the CBM OOT report, all four-year universities are required to report to the coordinating board student and course level information for any course that was not granted academic credit or credit towards the student's major. This information is reported for first-time transfers to the four-year institution that are coming directly from a public community technical or state college. So for this report, we have fall 2022 and spring 2023 data. Next slide, please. The CBM OOT provides 5 standard reasons for why a course was denied credit by the university. These are the course being outside the degree requirement, the student taking a course that did not meet the minimum grade requirement, a student taking a course that was a repeated course, the course exceeding the maximum transfer hours, and we have an option for other as well. Next slide, please. So now into some of the findings. So this first table shows the breakdown of the reported reasons for credit denial. You can see that about 71,000 courses were reported in fiscal year 2023. For context, about 50,000 of these courses were reported in the fall and about 21,000 were reported in the spring. More students typically transfer in the fall, so that's why we see twice as many courses being denied credit in the fall term. So for the purpose of this table and the tables that I will show moving forward, we are just combining the fiscal year together since we disaggregated the terms and didn't find any notable patterns or differences between the two terms and the courses that were denied credit. So from this table, as you can see, the top reason for credit denial was that the course is outside the degree requirement at around 43%. Next slide, please. So how many students took these approximately 71,000 courses that were denied credit? So we can see from this table that approximately 19,000 students were represented in our analysis. Almost half of the students in fiscal year 2023 had 2 or fewer courses that were denied credit. But we also can't ignore the fact that almost 21% of students had 6 or more courses that were denied credit. Next slide, please. This next table shows 2 things. It shows the top 5 most frequently denied courses, as well as the reasons given for their course denial. So we can see that the courses are the Learning Framework, College Algebra, General Psychology, Composition 1, and Composition 2. Now that we've been doing this report for several years now, these 5 courses remain the same across every year that we've done this report. The only difference is the ranking order of them, but the 5 courses remain the same. So we can see that the Learning Framework was most often denied credit due to it being outside of the degree requirement, while most of the rest of the courses were often denied credit for a combination of reasons. So for example, if we look at College Algebra, we can see that it was denied credit because it didn't meet the minimum grade requirement, but we also see a similar percentage for the course falling outside the degree requirement. As for the other courses, we see a higher percentage of credit denial due to not meeting the minimum grade requirement. So overall, we can use this table to help inform our efforts into which of these credit denial reasons we can likely address through policy. My team has been working with Elizabeth Mayer and the Academic and Health Affairs Division to focus on courses, in particular those that are falling outside of the degree requirement. Next slide, please.
Can I have a question real quick? We talk about a lot about minimum grade requirement. Is it a uniform minimum grade requirement or just different university will have minimum grade requirement?
Yeah, each institution has a different,
So
Mhm.
it is not uniform at all.
Yeah, it's each institution, it's dependent on each institution, and then sometimes within the institution, dependent on the overall department. So something by major could also have, let's say, a higher degree requirement. Let's say if we're talking about math, maybe it's a higher degree or higher grade requirement in a STEM major versus a liberal arts major. And so you even see that distinction there.
So it's always a balance between the, we really want those transfer credit to be easier, right? But at the same time, we also respect each public university or university, they have their own criteria in terms of whether accept this kind of grade from the community college as a minimum requirement for their own college. So that's a balance. I don't know if we want to strike that balance, or right now you feel like that's a pretty good balance right now?
So one of the things I'd flag is, so a number of these are courses where the students got D's or they took the course pass fail and they have a pass, but they didn't have a letter grade for the course.
And it does not meet the minimum requirement.
And generally, I mean, some institutions could have a local policy of going ahead and accepting.
A question, because most of these classes are also, a lot of kids take dual credit in high school. So there has to be some correlation with the grades. Is there with that? Because 1301 on psychology, all those are taking dual credit in high school. that could have something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So these courses, so what you're seeing in dual credit is a lot of the courses related to the core curriculum. That's so you would see that in students who are taking dual credit, and then just overall students who are wanting to complete their general education requirements. We haven't looked too deeply though into the dual credit student population to see what patterns might exist there in terms of their grades.
So is it a misdirection on, so how do we fix it? There obviously, if it's pass, fail, and you fail, I agree it shouldn't be counted in theory, but should we do a better job of helping them pass these courses, or should we do a better job of expanding these courses to fit more majors when they want to transfer? Or do we revise these courses to qualify for more categories,
A couple of,
rigor wise?
a couple of the things we have now that we've been working on that we will start to be in implementation. So in the new, first of all, in the new community college finance rules, we're going to condition the 15 hours of dual credit outcome to 15 hours of dual credit that apply to either academic or workforce credentials. So hopefully we'll have fewer sort of random dual credit courses, and then
Right, so they'll be more broadly applied.
so the colleges are going to have more of it. They have an incentive to make sure that students are taking courses that are going to be more likely to apply to pathways. And then we've been working with the institutions and want to emphasize how important this is with the institutions to get their recommended course sequences validated and submitted to us. We have a new template for the colleges to submit their recommended course sequences to us. So this is where they are required and have been required for the last 5 years, nearly 5 years in state law, to have recommended course sequences for every degree and certificate program, and then to submit that to us. And in the fall, we're going to release in My Texas Future a new tool called Map My Path, where students can compare and query those recommended course sequences. So if a student is trying to figure out, should I take this dual credit course or this AP class, and what would be more likely to transfer from ACC to Texas State, that kind of thing, they can put those recommended course sequences side by side and optimize their choices. So that tool should be live within My Texas Future this fall. So hopefully by the time we get into the spring, we'll start to see, we're already seeing it tighten up how many courses are not transferring. Hopefully we'll see that too.
So we plan to track it going forward, and because it's great that we're helping students help themselves, and that's a great tool, but our really authority is to mandate to the schools to get it right so that the students don't fall in this trap, because obviously 71,000 is a lot of money and time that, that didn't go anywhere. So
That's right. So again, I want to emphasize how important it is that the institutions get those recommended course sequences submitted to us.
Yeah, back to my comment, it's philosophical, basically. If a student, I have a college algebra, I want to transfer credit to one A school, and then it's accepted because the minimum requirement is there. B school is not accepted. Those are lower level classes. So either the school that I'm taking college algebra is not on par, meaning they are not really educating me to have a basic algebra, so that I cannot go to B school because their minimum requirement is not there. So it's philosophical. I believe that, well, I don't have a solution on that, but I think, for lower level courses, algebra is really straightforward. You either know or not know in order to get into a college. And but now one school saying my credit from my institution right now is acceptable. The other school said no because the different minimum grade requirements. So,
Mr. Wong, one of the issues that we see with college algebra is that's the most frequently taken dual credit class is college algebra. And so in our STEM programs, many of our STEM programs, college algebra does not meet a degree requirement because those programs will start at calculus. So college algebra would not apply to that degree program. we've flagged that, there's a long tradition of students taking college algebra as a terminal course, where they'll just take college algebra and not take any other math. And that's, I don't want to suggest algebra isn't inherently something that's valuable to know something about, but it doesn't have a lot of applicability if you're just taking college algebra as a terminal course. Usually students would take that if they need to be shored up in some concepts before they would go on, say, to a pre-calculus course or something like that. So we have been encouraging the community colleges. They ought to offer more students more dual credit statistics courses or courses, general math courses, even that, as opposed to just having sort of a college algebra as a terminal dual credit option.
It is unacceptable for any college to be teaching an algebra course that doesn't end with somebody knowing algebra. I mean, we ought to hold them accountable. Like you said, at the entry level, it just doesn't seem sense. It seems like a waste of effort.
Well, and a lot of the students are just taking college algebra and then they don't take another math course afterwards. So it's so they're just.
That's okay too, if they're not going into math and if it's required to do something. And I don't know if are they changing their mind and they were going to take it as a terminal course and now they decided to pursue a course that requires more math and now this one didn't qualify. Is that what's happening? Or?
So in the manual, the instructions that universities are given is that when a student identifies a major in their application, the student could not then have switched majors into something else. So let's say if they were pursuing a liberal arts major at the community college and then wanted to switch into STEM at the university, then any kind of courses that student would have taken would not be reported on this report. So in theory, I suppose that it would not capture that specific scenario that you just mentioned. Yeah.
I think too, as we're thinking about this, the hope for this report, as well as, and Christina will talk about this later, but a lot of this work, we're actively working with Elizabeth Mayer's team, providing this data to TTAC, to the teams that are talking about field of study, also in considering the recommended course sequence. I think the idea is transparency. And even if it is, a policy that we agree the university can make, the important thing that we're trying to make clear to everyone is, okay, but in this case, it may not transfer for this major. And we're trying to get that in front of people, both at the institutions to consider policies, but also ultimately to the students so they understand if I take out, college algebra, but I want to do this major, I will also need to take another math. So all of this together, I think we're really hoping to just create a more clear and transparent landscape for students. And how they choose what courses to take.
Question: when we roll out the map my path, how early are we doing that? So is it when they first get there, or it's like when 1 or 2 years after you've already had classes? How early are we doing it?
So we should be releasing Map My Path this fall. We have the design work and technical work essentially done. So what we need is the institutions will they submit their recommended course sequences in the template, and then we ingest all that data into the tool. So it should be where as early as this fall, students would from secondary schools, from high schools all the way through our colleges and universities will be able to query those recommended course sequences. And it, just to give you a sense, so the students can actually input the courses that they've taken already and get a sense of what program, of how those courses might apply to different programs also. So if the student has a lot of courses and they want to figure out, well, what's my quickest path to finish to be able to apply as many of these courses as they can, that'll be a feature within the tool.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I was just going to comment, this is a very important discussion in the policy moving forward, because the big picture is the legislature came to us several sessions ago and said, we need to make a path to make things easier for students. So it's not, I agree with the commissioner, it's not just seeing what you have, but really planning in advance to be able to have the structure to plan and have a roadmap to be able to meet one of the big missions, and that is to address affordability in higher education, right? And so that's something that's the big picture of all this important work that's going on, to be able to make that pathway, that journey for students and adult learners that are going back to school, to make that path clearer, more transparent, like Dr. Humphrey said, but to let people know, just don't take courses and spend money and time, but to be able to be on a track and plan.
And just to piggyback on that, I feel like we're co-opting your report with Map My Path, but I'm so excited about it because I think some institutions would be wise to take that information a step further and actually pre-populate a student's path for them and then let them deviate and opt out from there. Because what that I think would result in is more students graduating successfully and on time. And so pulling it into a 4-year average for a 4-year degree saves a mountain of money as far as affordability and opportunity costs. So I'm thrilled we are taking our part to take a step in that direction.
Okay, so the second part of the report looked at community college courses taken by students who transferred to a 4-year or earned an associate degree. Next slide, please. So this table right here shows the average number of semester credit hours completed at public 2-year colleges by students who transferred to a public 4-year university. So the bars on the left represent data for students that did not receive an associate degree before transferring to the 4-year, and the bars on the right represent data for students that completed an associate degree before transfer. So in blue, we can see the average total semester credit hours completed by each group of students. Those without the associate completed a little over 40 semester credit hours, while those with an associate completed around 60. Moving on to the bars in orange, we can see that both groups are completing courses that are found within the ACGM. For context, the ACGM contains lower division courses that are generally accepted for transfer. So the fact that most of the courses that these students are taking are within the ACGM is very good news. The bars in gray depict the number of completed courses that were found in the core curriculum. And again, just like we see for the ACGM across both groups, a significant portion of these completed courses are found within the core curriculum. And as we know, the completion of the core is essential for degree completion. Finally, the bars in yellow represent those courses taken as a college student, excluding dual credit. As we can see in both groups, most of the students in this analysis completed courses post-high school graduation. So the courses that they took were, they had already graduated and they were already at the college taking those courses. Next slide, please. So this leads us to our last bit of information on how we plan to leverage the CBMW report to improve transfer outcomes. Next slide, please. Since community colleges aren't always given information about the credit applicability of their students' courses, my team and I have been working to provide data to community colleges who have asked to see course denials originating from their institution. We know from working with these institutions that they are using these data internally to understand which courses present pain points for students, and it's also helping them guide conversations with their 4-year transfer partners. We've also been leveraging this data with the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee, as well as faculty working on field of study curricula. So within those field of study conversations, we've actually seen faculty wrestle with whether college algebra is the appropriate introductory level math course for students to be successful in the various disciplines that they pursue. And finally, we are actively planning to engage the field about ways that we can continue to make these data as accurate and consistent as possible. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation. We're happy to continue to answer any questions.
I'd like to make a comment. about college algebra. I was an engineering student, and when you are an engineering student, you should have solid basis in algebra. Otherwise, you're going to struggle all through the calculus, physics, and all that kind of science. So it's very critical that when you go to pre-sciences, physics, engineering, you better have very good basis in algebra. Everything depends on that. Thank you. Is there any other comments? And no further questions. So, member, is there a motion to approve the data report required by Texas Education Code 51.4033 and Section 514034 related to non-transferable credit and transfer? I have a motion and a second, please.
Motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda item 5B is a report on Financial Aid Advisory Committee activities. Ms. Merit Leaf Green, Chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, is not able to be with us today. So Ms. Leah Smalley, Senior Policy Director for the Student Financial Aid Program, will present this item on her behalf. This item is for information only. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. Again, my name is Leah Smalley. I'm the Senior Policy Director of Student Financial Aid Programs. And Millette Leaf Green, she's the chair of the committee, was unfortunately not able to be here today, so I'm stepping in for her. And really, I'll just be going through some highlights of this past year's activities. There is a report that you may have seen in the agenda materials, but I'm just going to be going through some of the higher level highlights and also some of the upcoming activities that we have planned. This past December, I stepped in as the coordinating board's representative to this committee. So I've been working with this committee for many years, but now I'm in a capacity where I'm sitting on the committee itself. So again, thank you for having me, but I wanted to just first explain what the committee does. Financial Aid Advisory Committee is really comprised of both colleges, universities from both sectors, both public and private. We also have representation from ISDs across the state. And then we also include nonprofits that help support higher education so that we can have a very diverse perspective on this committee. The goals of the committee are really to come together to work with coordinating board staff to talk about advice, recommendations, different ideas that they have because they come from all these different areas and they support different student populations to identify either policy recommendations or reporting changes, things of that nature. Would they also do things to help us guide research initiatives and other activities? Now, this past year was very active. I'm sure you've been following the federal changes to the free application for federal student aid. So this past year, a lot of the activities of the committee really were driven around those discussions of kind of how to prepare, what is the Department of Education doing, because those in turn affect state financial aid programs as well. So a lot of the discussion items were around the FAFSA and how those changes would then influence our operations and our reporting. They also talked a lot about the change to the federal methodology because they shifted from something called the expected family contribution to something now called the Student Aid Index, which was a pretty big shift. So the committee came together and kind of talked about, how they were going to implement those changes once that came through on the FAFSA. Now, another thing that we often do on the committee is we invite people to present to the committee on different things. It can be anything from policy, different organizations come in to talk about student success initiatives, research that they're doing. So it's a really way to find out what's going on across the state or even nationally. And so we partner with different organizations such as the Trellis Corporation. We also partner with different organizations. We had the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. They go by NASFA. We also had Southwestern Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, also known as SWASFA. Oh, lots of A's in these acronyms. But we also have coordinating board. The coordinating board delivers a lot of presentations on different things that are changing throughout the agency, whether that's technology, whether that's policies, different initiatives that we're working on to create transparency and also seek feedback. One of the really benefits of this committee that I've always been a part of, and I think that it does a lot of good work, is that we have multiple subcommittees within the larger committee. So I'm going to highlight two of those today. So the first is our data collection subcommittee. And the goal of this particular committee throughout the year is to come together quarterly and talk about how are we collecting data? How can we streamline? How can we make things more efficient? And really get their input on what are we doing behind the scenes at the coordinating board that could make their lives easier, better, and ultimately for the student really improve their experience or to, gain access to state financial aid. So the data sub-collection committee this past year, they worked heavily on our financial aid database. That's where we collect financial aid information from the colleges and universities, and that in turn is used for different reports, legislative analysis, and things of that nature. But, it needed an upgrade. And so this past year, there was a big initiative to do a modernization. So we utilized this subcommittee to help with testing. They helped guide a lot of the decisions made on that modernization. Another big thing that they worked on was the centralization of a technology that we developed. It's called the Grant and Aid Processing Platform. So we call it the GAP. And it was a long initiative to streamline all of the payment systems for all of our programs into one place. And so this subcommittee helped with beta testing. They helped kind of work out all the bugs in the system before we rolled it out, and it made it a much more successful initiative. Lastly, this committee gave different advice and, really helped think through some of our other topics, such as financial aid for SWIFT transfers, the FAST program. That was rolled out as a result of HB8 in the last session. We also produce things like materials for the institutions to administer their programs. So this committee looks at those and gives us advice on how to improve those materials and training so that we can make sure things are a lot more easier to administer from that perspective. And we also looked at new administrative changes for our Texas College Work Study program. Partnering with these schools that use that program, how can we, clarify or make things smoother for them? The other committee I wanted to highlight was our Texas Application for State Financial Aid, or TASFA. So every year we have a committee. It's comprised of not only institutions, but we also have ISDs, and we did that so that we could have both sides of the house. We wanted to make sure that those that are supporting K through 12 can give some insight onto how their experience is with these students and their families. And also from the institutional perspective, when they get the TASFA, how is that processing it? What are their concerns? And so all of that goes in every year to this committee where they make decisions on how to change and improve and enhance the form. And the past few years, there's been a huge initiative, if you have not heard, that the TASFA was built as an online platform to have that balance with FAFSA. We wanted access for students to have that electronically. So for the past, I'd say 3 years now, that's been built. And so this year was a huge success. Last August, we finally launched the 23-24 TASFA. And then in February, we launched the 24-25 TASFA. So now students across the state can access that form electronically. And this committee was a huge part of that because they also helped with the testing. They helped analyze the FAFSA to make sure that we had the alignment between the two forms. And they also, were involved in a lot of the demos and things that we did to help get the committee up to speed on where that application was at. So the members really wanted me to express when I came up today to just their continued support and interest in this committee. I know there's no decisions or anything being made today, but really just to tell you, they enjoy the opportunity to share information with each other. They use it as a platform to identify key services and ways to successfully administer their programs to Texas residents in pursuit of higher education. It allows different sectors to come together and provide perspectives on a way to advance the state's mission and goals in building a talent-strong Texas. And it helps influence research and reporting and other things. So lastly, I just wanted to leave you with, now that I've stepped in and I'm trying to, get acclimated to how we can keep this good work going, some of the things that we're talking about for this upcoming year are really bringing more awareness to policy changes. Obviously, as the policy director, we're trying to get more of those conversations into the mix so that we can talk about these things and how, different ideas and things that we're doing may influence how they administer these at the institution and how that would benefit students. So that's going to be happening. We're also trying to network with more organizations and nonprofits to help come present ideas and give us more information going on out in the communities and things like that, because a lot of times, we have people come in, but there's so many organizations out there. So we're really trying to grow our pool of people that we can have come help support this committee. And then lastly, we created this last meeting, and it was well received, but we are creating something to create engagement, and we're calling it Bridge the Gaps, not to use gaps everywhere so many times, but what we decided that stands for is goals, achievements, progress, and solutions. And the idea being that the committee can share during this segment, what are some best practices? What are some things that they're doing that is working well, so that they can collaborate or even talk about things that are not working well, and so that they can share and improve things at their institution. And again, seems to be well received, and we're hoping that that will be a good opportunity for these schools and these ISDs to partner together. So that is my update. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I'm here to take any questions if you have any.
Just want to chime in quickly again, just to emphasize how much we appreciate the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. So we have had a ton of work that's been underway around financial aid, and being able to work in such close partnership with the institutions has been really critical for the success of this work. So the rollout of that GAP platform was a major lift, and for our team, and also working with the field, and we were able to roll that out really without any hiccups, and that was a huge effort. The FAST financial aid for Swift transfer, financial aid for dual credit, our finance team and our financial aid team have been able to work with institutions. And this year, in our first year of implementation, I think it's about 86% of the semester credit hours that are offered across the state for dual credit and dual enrollment institutions have opted into this new program that was in HB 8. And I do have to emphasize also, I really appreciate the exemplary work on the online TAFSA. So that was rolled out seamlessly. We have a lot of discussions. We'll have a lot of discussions at this board meeting, and continuing dialogue with the institutions and with the Department of Ed about issues around the FAFSA. We were on our Texas application, though, able to have a seamless deployment of that. And it's because of excellent work from our team, but also this close partnership with the institutions, where we get a lot of candid feedback that we're able to put directly into improving the work for our institutions. So again, I just want to amplify and say how much we appreciate this partnership.
This item is for information only. Members, are there any questions? If not, we go to agenda item 5C, which was approved on consent calendar. Agenda item 5D, consideration of possible action to approve recommendation of the Commissioner and formula advisory committees relating to the funding formulas for the use by the governor and the legislative budget board in making appropriate recommendation to the appropriate legislative committees. Ms. Emily Corner, Assistant Commissioner for Funding, will provide a brief overview and the funding formulas, and the committee chairs, Mr. Daniel Harper and Mr. Michael Termal, will present their recommendation. Please.
Good morning. I'm Emily Cormier, Assistant Commissioner for Funding, and I'm pleased to be here before you to talk through the recommendations of the Formula Advisory Committees. I'll give a moment to let my colleagues introduce themselves and where they're from.
Yeah, Daniel Harper. I'm the CFO at Texas State University System and the chair of the General Academic Formula Advisory Committee.
And I'm Michael Tremonti. I'm the CFO at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, or UT Health Houston, and the chair of the health-related Formula Advisory Committee.
So thank you all for being here today. So what we have before you is a brief slide deck where we'll talk through why we do the Formula Funding Advisory Committees, and then we'll briefly walk through the recommendations that were brought forward by each committee, as well as some commissioner recommendations. And then after we walk through those, I'll turn it to the chair to provide context on each of them. So moving to the next slide. So just to lay the groundwork, the vast majority of state funding is provided to our higher ed institutions through funding formulas. These are unique to each sector of higher education in the state. And the coordinating board is required by statute to provide recommendations to the legislative budget board and to the governor's office on these funding formulas every 2 years. Additionally, statute requires us to use a committee process to basically gather expert input from the field on what those recommendations should be. So that gets formalized as the Formula Advisory Committees. We have two committees, one which is the General Academic Institution, State and Technical College Committee, and one for the Health-Related Institutions Committee. I will note that this is the first year that the technical and state colleges were included with the general academic institutions. Prior to House Bill 8, they were incorporated with the community colleges, who now have their own standing advisory committee that's sort of separate from this process. And so the way these recommendations are used is really as kind of a overall signal from the board to the legislature on what they should consider as they're putting together the appropriations bill. So this could be something like taking into account the inflationary environment that's going on, or really technical pieces of a formula that the schools were able to really dig into through this process and tee up for the legislature to consider as they begin meeting. And then finally, these recommendations provide the framework upon which the coordinating board works with schools to gather student level data and then provide it to the legislative budget board this fall and next spring as legislature is meeting. Next slide. So these committees pretty much kick off even before the new biennium begins. The commissioner lays out charges in August. The committees meet through the fall and then bring forward the recommendations in the spring. So at this point in the process, we're bringing it to you for consideration. And then by June 1st, we need to provide it to the legislative budget board and governor's office. Next slide. So now we'll walk through the charges and the recommendations of the General Academic, Technical, and State College Committee. So this is just a reminder on what were the charges that were laid out to this group. So the first three were really statutorily required. It's about the funding levels for the four-year institutions, the state colleges, and the technical colleges. We also have a catch-all charge that's really, review all inputs, make any recommendations. And then there was a co-charge actually between the two committees to look at health-related programs and how they're funded between the two different sectors. So this briefly lays out the recommendations of this group. So this committee recommended looking at each of the formulas that fund the general academic institutions and state colleges by their rate and increasing those by the inflation over the past few years, and then funding enrollment growth. There's also 2 technical recommendations, one pertaining to the expenditure study, which is something that is used basically weight courses by discipline and level for the general academic institutions to better account for some inflation that is being seen at lower level liberal arts. And then also a recommendation for the Legislative Budget Board to consider using most recent actual tuition collections versus estimates when setting the appropriations bill. For the co-charge, the groups coordinated and recommended the creation of a supplement that would be outside of the existing formulas that would basically fund the semester credit hours at the general academic institutions at the health-related rate. And that would be for programs that are delivered at both the different types of institutions. Next slide. And then finally, for the recommendations for the Texas State Technical Colleges, the vast majority of their funding is given through what's called the returned value formula. And so this is an outcomes-based funding that's predominantly rooted in job earnings of students after attending a TSTC. And so the group had 2 recommendations related to this formula. The first one is that workforce continuing education students have not historically been captured in this formula, so the group recommended to incorporate those. And then the second is that dual credit students are also not captured in this formula. So the group recommended to fund those through a new contact hour formula to account for the services delivered to these students. There is also a commissioner recommendation. So the current formula compares job earnings of students after attending TSTC to minimum wage to basically estimate what was the value added by the TSTC education. So the commissioner recommendation would be to make a fairly technical adjustment to use more up-to-date high school graduate wage earnings to account for the increases and the rise in wages in the state over the past few years. And then to make sure that the TSTCs are not negatively impacted by this change, to then make a conforming adjustment to the amount that is returned to them by the state after making this adjustment to the methodology. So I'll stop there and see if the commissioner wants to add anything more on that recommendation before turning it to the chair.
Thanks, Emily. So just one of the things I'd want to emphasize is kind of how this fits into the budget process. So this ends up being an important input to the start of the deliberations. But generally, the legislature does not cut and paste the recommendations into the appropriations bill. So this again ends up being one of the inputs. There are a few items that have already popped up in interim charges and where the legislature is clearly wanting to do some more work, especially around the mission-specific formulas for our HRIs. And so this was not a surprise to us, and we'll continue to work closely with the members and with the HRIs on that issue in particular. Also, there's ongoing conversations about the structure both of the GII formulas, the update to the TSTC formulas, and then of course we're going to have extensive discussion about community college finance formulas. So this is a so I appreciate the work that goes into producing these initial recommendations, but again, I see that as like an important starting point to the budget cycle that we're about to enter.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a historic formula. How does it comprehend changes in the workforce requirements going forward that can be factored into the educational funding?
So it depends on which sector. So we have different, pretty fundamentally different formulas for different sectors. So the now with the changes in community college finance, so the community college formulas and the TSTC formulas are much more dynamic and responsive to changes in workforce needs. The TSTC formula is longer established, but that's just a return value formula. So it looks at sort of what the wage premium is for the TSTC graduates, and so it's indirectly tracking with changes in the demand that's reflected in wages. And then in community colleges, we've got a little more direct weighting that we'll discuss later. That's linked to high demand fields and what we're tracking both in the recent past and also for our emerging high demand fields. Just throwing it out there, I'd argue this is one of the weaknesses in our general academic formulas in particular. So general academic formulas are primarily just based on seat time. And so the formula is a cost-based formula where it looks at what the patterns of expenditures have been like by different fields, but doesn't have the same kind of dynamic weighting that's linked to changes in workforce needs.
Members, any further discussion? If not,
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So on the health-related institutions and the formula funding, there's some discrepancies sometimes between allied health professions. So there's some pharmacy schools and some programs around the state that are not equitable. Can you address that? And does the formula funding committee look at that specifically? And especially with oncoming new programs that we've recently approved, new medical schools, possible new programs, the new vet school, the new dental school, and all that enters into the picture. Can you address that, please?
The additions of the new schools are critical to our shortage in health professions. There's no doubt about that. And frankly, it's a little bit of a race we haven't adequately kept up with funding wise. In all of the funding, we're seeing dollars go up biennium after biennium, but we are also adding medical schools. We are also adding new programs. And so right now we're barely keeping our head above water, just keeping up with that growth. We still are woefully behind in terms of medical professionals, nurses, pharmacists, and so on. And so I think in those respects, we continue to look at our formula rates to factor in both growth and as you can see in our recommendation, inflation, because we're really losing ground in that respect. I think as far as the health-related institutions and the programs that are both at the academics and the health-related, that is the notion behind the additional supplement to help bridge those gaps and bring those closer together.
Right. But then who determines and how is it determined whether a health profession program or school is in the general academic and not in the health-related?
Typically, and Emily, I don't know if you or have a better answer. I'll give you what I think, and I'm speaking from my health-related experiences.
Right.
Generally, we are fairly unique in our offerings. We're fairly static. Many of the academic institutions are expanding their programs. We have seen some expansion, but more on the public health side, and the medical school side. As far as other programs, whether it be the vet or pharmacy or so on, we typically that's not our forte. So we aren't venturing into those programs from a health related.
But why not? I mean, they're health related and they're in the general academic. That's my question.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to economies of scale, the faculty that you have and the infrastructure you have to support it. Pharmacy has its own unique needs, for example, and we not saying that isn't something that could be done, but it's much more expensive to undertake. Bringing up new programs is always an expensive process. Formula funding always lags a biennium. And
Right.
so then you're needing startup funds from the legislature. So it's just more difficult in that respect.
Yeah, because the institutions, when they propose new programs to us here at the coordinating board, they have to look at all that. And sometimes, I guess the legislature obviously looks at all that, but the recommendations from these committees, what I've seen over the years is sometimes they're in general academic, but they're really health related, We had the first podiatry school of medicine at UTRGV the first in the state. And that was put in health related. So maybe, is it historical, or Commissioner, do you know something about that?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I think the joint work between the General Academic and the HRI Formula Advisory Committee on these issues, Mr. Chairman, ended up being really important. I appreciate the recommendation because that they came up with, because you do end up with, sometimes for contingent and historical reasons, there are programs that are located within general academic institutions or they're within HRIs. You wouldn't want to set up the incentives to necessarily expand programs within HRIs if that doesn't make sense for the kind of economics of that institution. But right now there are very different weights and funding rates depending on whether these programs are located within HRIs or general academics. So, so they put their heads together and basically said, instead of sort of reworking all of the rates and trying to consolidate it all, try to add a supplement to even out the funding so that you'd eliminate that kind of that distortion that would nudge folks to maybe scale a program in an HRI when it might make more sense to try to scale it within the general academic institution, depending on what the cost structures would be. So that's one of the things I would recommend going forward is that we continue to work on these issues jointly across the two formula advisory committees, because I think that's a very productive discussion when they're talking about, okay, well, how do we lean into meeting the state's needs and try to align the incentives there, as opposed to just looking separately at the HRIs and versus the general academics.
Right. No, I think that's good, working together. And I really appreciate both of you being here and you chairing the committees, and to all your members, because I know there's a lot of work that goes into this and it's very important. And I know it's important to the institutions, the systems, and it's important work. But I think as we dig deeper into it, I have over the several years, I mean, it's an ongoing process. So thank you for the work that y'all do.
So before moving on to the health-related institution slides, I'd like to give Mr. Harper a chance to provide any comments on the general academic institutions.
Well, thank you, Emily. I just have kind of 3 things to leave with the committee. As an unbiased supporter of Harrison Keller, I appreciate the meaningful charges he gave us. I mean, 5 of them, all workable, manageable. The first 3 were to address a policy issue on the funding level. The last 2 were to work on technical issues that we've had or have evolved over the last 2 decades. So feel good about those. Thank Emily and Jennifer Gonzalez for all the work they did, the committee. And then I guess finally conclude with, it's good that we were able to tackle 3 issues that have existed for 20 years and have a workable recommendation for the legislature if they so chose to take us up on it. So thank y'all.
Members, any further discussion? If not,
I think we have a few more slides.
pardon me? Okay.
So we'll move into the recommendations for the health-related institutions. So here we lay out the charges that the HRI Formula Advisory Committee took on. The first one is that standard charge relating to the funding levels for all of the formulas that support the health-related institutions. The next 2 were really technical in nature, looking at the formula weights and how we adjust for remote sites at the health-related institutions. And then we also included a charge that was specific to looking at mission-specific formulas. So the legislature recently has authorized an increase in the number of mission-specific formulas at our health-related institutions. So it was a good time to take a step back and examine how those are working across the state. And then finally, there was that co-charge. Then moving to the next slide. So on here, we've laid out briefly what those recommendations are. So similar to the other sector, they are recommending to look at the rates for all of the formulas and increase those based on inflation and then the funding of any enrollment growth. In regard to the formula inputs, there was a recommendation to create 2 separate weights for graduate nursing and graduate allied health. Right now, those are funded at the same level as undergraduate nursing or undergraduate allied health. And so this would account for the increased cost based on the more complex nature of the graduate education. And then there's also two technical adjustments relating to how small parts of the formula and how they support remote campuses at the health-related institutions. The group also concurred with the General Academic Institutions supplement recommendation relating to health-related programs at the General Academic Institutions. So moving to the next slide. In regards to the mission-specific formulas, the group recommending continuing to fund these at their specific performance-based or clinical-based targets, and also include funding that the institutions received last session in their base. The commissioner did include a recommendation on this issue to continue to review these as we move forward and seek ways to simplify the formulas while recognizing that there are significant differences across our varied and unique health institutions in the state. There was additionally a commissioner recommendation on another item that's recently come up at the agency. So currently, doctorate degrees are classified as either research or professional practice degrees. So when we were doing the rule process for the Texas University Fund and the new research formulas that came out of last session, the agency chose to align our classification of what is a research doctorate or professional practice doctorate with Federal National Science Foundation classifications. And then we're planning to align that across our agency and our program inventory. And what that would cause is 8 programs that would move from being classified as a research doctorate to now a professional practice doctorate. That had an inadvertent effect for health-related formula funding and how we treat research doctoral students versus professional practice doctoral students. So the commissioner recommendation would make kind of a technical fix to ensure that we treat all doctoral students on the same basis for funding. So we're not making distinctions between and professional practice programs. So at this point, I'll pause and see if the commissioner would like to add any comments before we move to the chair.
No, I defer to the chair.
Thank you, Emily. And I like Mr. Harper, would like to thank Emily for her assistance and Melita Berger from the coordinating board staff. They were key in helping us work through the numbers and bring forward our recommendations. As in last biennium with COVID, inflation was rampant and had a significant impact on our institutions. As time has gone on, those numbers are starting to diminish, but they're still there. And we are still trying to keep pace with the growth of the state. Fortunate or unfortunate, Texas is growing, and we need to provide more healthcare professionals. We're woefully short. We are literally the 45th out of 50 states when it comes to medical professionals. And so we've got a lot of room to go. We've got new programs that have come online at U of H, at Sam Houston, and so they're going to continue to help the numbers. But again, we're chasing the ball a little bit here. The key here is going to be also funding inflation. It's having a significant impact. We literally we used 2019 as a baseline because that's when effectively the base weight or base rate has gone unchanged since then. There was nominal change last biennium, but generally it's we've lost about 20% in our buying power since 2019, and so we're hoping that this will be something that the legislature certainly considers as we go forward. And certainly appreciate your consideration as well. I thank you for what you do here and for listening to us today and appreciate your assistance.
Any other comments? If not, members, is there a motion to approve recommendation relating to the funding formulas for use by the governor and the legislative budget board in making appropriations recommendation to the appropriate legislative committees? Do you have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in say aye.
Aye.
Members, motion passes. Agenda item 5E was approved on consent calendar. Agenda item 5F, one is consideration possible action to adopt proposed amendments to the board rules, chapter 13, subchapter S, section 13.550 and 13.558 and 13.560 13.64 concerning the community college financing program. Miss Emily Fournier will present this item and be able to answer any question.
So I'll be covering the new Chapter 13S rules pertaining to community college finance. This is the main governance program for the community colleges, and you heard a presentation at the last board meeting on the main changes for the community colleges as we transition from basically first-year implementation to ongoing implementation for House Bill 8. We'll be discussing this information in more detail tomorrow, including some of the additional rules that we'll be bringing forward to the board for consideration in July to complete the framework for community colleges and really align the incentives that House Bill 8 envisioned into the program. So for now, I'm just going to recap this at a high level. So this set of rules lays out the calculation of funding for the community colleges, including the base tier and the performance tier. The performance tier is based on student outcomes achieved, and institutions receive a set dollar amount for those outcomes. The fundable outcomes include credentials of value done through two different tiers. One is through the baseline statewide analysis of the return on investment of the credential, as well as a new bonus tier called the premium, which is based on an individual student's achievement. The credentials of value include associates, bachelor's, certificates, and then also new short-term workforce credentials such as occupational skills awards and institutional credentials leading to licensure and certification, or ICLCs. We will have new fundable credentials that will start in fiscal year 2025. This will include third-party credentials as well as for any opportunity high school diplomas that are awarded in the state. There are two main changes in these rules for our new workforce credentials, the ICLCs. There's currently a contact hour threshold to determine when an ICLC can be submitted for funding. And our rules have made a revision based on feedback from the field to remove those contact hour restrictions beginning in fiscal year 2026, when we'll be able to transition those to our credential value methodology and actually really examine these credentials on an individual basis. Additionally, we no longer count the institutional credentials for students who might have received the licensure or certification, but were not actually awarded a credential by the institution. Moving forward, institutions have to confer a credential, and that's really just kind of taking away a transition year that we allowed for institutions. The rules also update technical calculations across the performance tier to ensure there's no double counting of hours across different outcomes and to shore up how we calculate adult learners in the formula. The rule also references how we define and calculate high demand fields as institutions receive a higher funding amount for credentials delivered in these areas. The next item on your agenda is the rule that lays out how those are defined, so I'll hold my comments on those until then. After this rule was posted for comment, a few revisions were incorporated, the main one being that transition of all fundable credentials to our credential value methodology by fiscal year 2026, and also including a limitation on the sharing of contact hours between certain short-term workforce credentials. There were public comments received, and the responses are listed in your materials. I would note that we were responsive to several comments, including adding the language regarding removing contact hour thresholds, and several of the comments do pertain to rules that we'll be bringing forward to you in July, so we were able to consider that as we're drafting those proposals. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, does have any questions? If not, members, there's a motion to adopt the proposed amendments to Chapter 13, Subchapter S, Section 13.550-13.558 and 13.560- 13.564 concerning the community college finance program. Do I have a motion and a second, please?
Motion? Oh, sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We move on to agenda item F2 is consideration of possible action to adopt new board rules section chapter 13 subchapter T section 13.590-13.597 concerning performance funding for community colleges.
So I'll be moving into the new Chapter 13T rules. So as I mentioned, these determine what is considered a high demand field upon which community colleges can earn a higher rate for credentials conferred in these areas. This rule proposes the creation of a list that is really a mix of statewide and regional specific occupational needs and really consists of the following four categories. So first, we look at the 10 top statewide high demand occupations, and we define that using federal jobs data and employment projections. Next, we add 5 region-specific high demand occupations for occupations that are not otherwise on the state list, and these are unique to each region in the state. We are breaking up the state into regions using the comptroller's methodology because that better aligns with workforce development areas. And additionally, schools may petition us for up to 5 region-specific essential occupations. And so this is to account for occupations that otherwise haven't appeared on the list, but are still vital in that specific region of the state. And then finally, there's so-called emerging occupations. And these are statewide and are based on legislative priority. So that have been very obviously designated a statewide need through either the passage of a legislative bill or authorization of funding in the budget. And we will consider those after consulting with the governor's office to ensure that we are accurately applying what we believe is the statewide goals. And a few specific points on these rules. We heard from institutions questions about regional assignments. So to be responsive, the rules were edited to allow institutions to request to change regions as long as the new region in their service area, if they think it better aligns with their workforce needs. And so at that point, a school would have to remain in a new region for at least 4 fiscal years. With regards to the essential occupations, those have to be considered a target occupation by the region's workforce development board. And if colleges petition to add more than 5 occupations, then we will score them using a rubric that we will develop with the Texas Workforce Commission. We also position language for how we'll move to this methodology over the next few years. And then in July, we'll actually bring forward to you the list of those occupations and the fields. There were public comments received and the responses are listed in your materials. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
If there are no question, member, is there a motion to adopt new rule Chapter 13, Subchapter T, Section 13.590-13.597 concerning the determination of high demand fields, use the calculation of performance funding for community college? Do I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Agenda item 5F-3 was approved on the consent calendar. We move on to agenda item 5F4. Consideration of possible action to adopt amendment to board rules, chapter 22, subchapter 1, section 22.165-22.168 and 22.170-22.173 concerning Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program. Dr. Charles Quintero, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Programs, will present this item and be available to answer any questions. Doc.
Thank you. Again, I am Charles Quintero Pulse, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, and I would like to present to you some modifications being made to the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program. Senate Bill 371 from the 88th legislative session modified the ROTC requirement for participants in the Texas Armed Service Scholarship Program. It modified it from 4 years for all participants to 1 year of ROTC for each year receiving the scholarship. So to better align participation in ROTC with actual scholarship receipt. The rules have been amended to incorporate this change throughout. We also took the time to make non-substantive changes to remove some duplicate language and to align language with agency standards. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about these rules.
Members, is there any discussion? If not, there is a motion to adopt the proposed amendment to Chapter 22, Subchapter 1, Section 22.165-22.168 and 22.170-22.17 concerning the Texas Armed Service Scholarship Program. Do I have a motion and a second?
Motion?
Second.
Motion passes. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We move on to agenda item 5F. Number 5 is consideration of possible action to adopt amendments to board rules. Chapter 23 is subchapter J, section 23.286, 20-23.293 concerning the Math and Science Scholarship Loan Repayment Program. Dr. Charles Quintero Plus will present this and be available to any question. Doc.
Thank you. So the second set of rules I have for you is in relation to the Math and Science Scholars Loan Repayment Program. Senate Bill 532 from the 88th legislative session modified the teaching requirement to eliminate the requirement that the school where the teacher is working be a Title I school. And this is effective with applicants who enter agreements on or after September 1, 2023. The rules have been amended throughout to incorporate this change. And we also took the time to make some non-substantive changes, again, to remove duplicate language and to align language with agency standards. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
No further discussion. Member, is there a motion to adopt the proposed amendments to Chapter 23, Subchapter J, Section 23.286-23.293 concerning the Math and Science Scholars Loan Repayment Program? Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Agenda item number 6 is adjournment. Do I have a motion and a second, please?
Motion.
Second.
Motion passes. We will now take a short break to allow the staff to set up the for the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success meeting. Thank you.